Hello, and thank you for joining me again. This is Confidential Sensitive Source Company Intelligence Report 2016-086, Russia Cybercrime, a synopsis of Russian state-sponsored and other cyber-offensive criminal operations. This report is dated 26 July 2016. Summary. Russia has extensive program of state-sponsored offensive cyber operations. External targets include foreign governments and big corporations, especially banks. FSB leads on cyber within Russian apparatus. Limited success in attacking top foreign targets like G7 governments, security services, and IFIs, I guess that's international financial institutions, services and IFIs, but much more on second-tier ones through IT backdoors, using corporate and other visitors to Russia. FSB often uses coercion and blackmail to recruit most capable cyber operatives in Russia into its state-sponsored programs. Heavy use also, both wittingly and unwittingly, of CIS emigres working in Western corporations and ethnic Russians employed by neighboring governments, e.g. Latvia. Examples cited of successful Russian cyber operation targeting senior Western business visitor, provided backdoor into important Western institutions. Example given of U.S. citizen of Russian origin, approached by FSB and offered incentive of, quote, investment in his business when visiting Moscow. Problems, however, for Russian authorities themselves in countries local hackers and cyber criminals operating outside state control. Central Bank claims there were over 20 serious attacks on correspondent accounts held by CBR in 2015. Comprising rubles several billion in fraud. And final summary, some details given of leading non-state Russian cyber criminal groups. And now the details. Number one, speaking in June 2016, a number of Russian figures with a detailed knowledge of national cyber crime, both state-sponsored and otherwise, outlined the current situation in this area. A former senior intelligence officer divided Russian state-sponsored offensive cyber operations into 4 categories in order of priority, targeting foreign, especially Western governments, penetrating leading foreign business corporations, especially banks, domestic monitoring of the elite, and attacking political opponents both at home and abroad. The former intelligence officer reported that the Federal Security Service, the FSB, was the lead organization within the Russian state apparatus for cyber operations. 2. In terms of the success of Russian offensive cyber operations to date, a senior government figure reported that there had been only limited success in penetrating the so-called first-tier foreign targets. These comprised Western, especially G7 and NATO governments, security and intelligence services and central banks, and the IFIs. To compensate for this shortfall, massive effort had been invested, with much greater success, in attacking these secondary targets, particularly Western private banks and the governments of smaller states allied to the West. She or he mentioned Latvia in this regard. Hundreds of agents, either consciously cooperating with the FSB or whose personal and professional IT systems had been unwittingly compromised, were recruited. Many were people who had ethnic and family ties to Russia and or had been incentivized financially to cooperate. Such people often would receive monetary inducements or contractual favors from the Russian state or its agents in return. This had created difficulties for parts of the Russian state apparatus in obliging or indulging them. For example, the Central Bank of Russia knowingly having to cover up for such agents' money laundering operations through the Russian financial system. 3. In terms of the FSB's recruitment of capable cyber operatives to carry out its ideally deniable offensive cyber operations, a Russian IT specialist with direct knowledge reported in June 2016 that this was often done using coercion and blackmail. In terms of foreign agent, the FSB was approaching U.S. citizens of Russian (Jewish) origin on business trips to Russia. In one case, a U.S. citizen of Russian ethnicity had been visiting Moscow to attract investors to his new information technology program. The FSB clearly knew this and had offered to provide seed capital to this person in return for them being able to access and modify his IP, with a view to targeting priority foreign targets by planting a Trojan virus in his software. The U.S. visitor was told this was common practice. The FSB also had implied significant operational success as a result of installing cheap Russian IT games containing their own malware unwittingly by targets on their PCs and other platforms. 4. In a more advanced state and successful FSB operation, an IT operator, including inside a leading Russian SOE, that's state-owned enterprises, SOE, state-owned enterprise. In a more advanced and successful FSB operation, an IT operator inside a leading Russian SOE, who previously had been employed on conventional, that is defensive, IT work there, had been under instruction for the last year to conduct an offensive cyber operation against a foreign director of the company. Although the latter was apparently an infrequent visitor to Russia, the FSB now successfully had penetrated his personal IT and through this had managed to access various important institutions in the West through the back door. 5. In terms of other technical IT platforms, an FSB cyber operative flagged up the so-called Telegram enciphered commercial system as having been of especial concern and therefore heavily targeted by the FSB, not least because it was used frequently by Russian international political activists and oppositionists. His or her understanding was that the FSB now successfully had cracked this communications software, and therefore it was no longer secure to use. And 6th and final, the senior Russian government official cited above also reported that non-state-sponsored cybercrime was becoming an increasing problem inside Russia for the government and authorities there. The Central Bank of Russia claimed that in 2015 alone, there had been more than 20 attempts at serious cyber embezzlement of money from corresponding accounts there, comprising several billions rubles. More generally, she or he understood there were circa 15 major organized crime groups in the country involved in cyber crime, all of which continued to operate largely outside state and FSB control. These included the so-called Anunek, Buktrap, and Metel organizations. And this report is dated 26th of July, 2015. Thank you for watching. Get your friends to follow the link and view this program, and tune in to see my next installment. Thank you.